Today's daf we're going to be learning is Pesachim Daf Ayin Bet. Today's daf is sponsored by Shira Krebs to mark the completion of Shloshim for her father-in-law, Eliezer ben Dov Rachel, who never stopped engaging in multifaceted Jewish tradition and always appreciated a good debate. And by Jennifer Lankin in honor of Marilyn Kamen, with love from her granddaughters who are consistently inspired by her dedication to Gemara learning. May we celebrate the next Daf Yomi Siyum together, Be'ezrat Hashem. And by Giti Neufeld in my honor, to my teacher, mentor, and friend on her birthday. May you be blessed with many years of health, wisdom, and nachat from your family and your students. Thank you. Okay, we're going to start at, I want to go back to the Mishnah because it was actually funny. We're doing a Mishnah about Ta'ah B'Dvar Mitzvah, and I made some mistakes in explaining the Mishnah, so I'm going to go back and re-explain. So let's start. We started with the Mishnah. Let's just go through only the first section. The last section was pretty simple about the Ochlav and Lo Ochlav and all that, but we're going to start with the beginning part. Pesach, we're on Ayin Aleph Amud Bet at the Mishnah. Pesach shechachato shelo lishmo b'Shabbat chayav alav chatat. So you take a Pesach, you slaughter it for the wrong intent. So that we know is a disqualified sacrifice, and therefore everyone agrees you're going to be obligated. Ushar kol hazvachim sheshachatan l'shem Pesach. But what if you took a different sacrifice, a shlamim, and you, instead of taking a Pesach and saying, I'm doing this as a shlamim. Now, just remember, we're talking about on Erev Pesach, where it's also Shabbat. So you're not allowed to take a regular shlamim and sacrifice it on Shabbat. If you take this shlamim and you sacrifice it in the name of Pesach, you say, I'm bringing this to Korban Pesach. So then the Mishnah says it depends. And we're going to see not everyone agrees with this, but our Mishnah says it depends. If it was an animal that had all the criteria that it could have been a Korban Pesach, then we're going to have a machlok at Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua. Are you exempt or are you obligated? Rabbi Eliezer is going to always have the strict approach. We're going to make you chayav anyway. You made a mistake, and therefore you have to pay the price, so to speak. You have to bring a sacrifice. That's classic unwitting, but right, shogeg. But according to Rabbi Yeshua, if it was a legitimate mistake, and it's if it was an animal that you could have brought as a Korban Pesach, so you're an idiot, right? Why'd you take this animal that was a cow and think that you could slaughter it for a Pesach? That's your fault. But if you took something and you thought maybe, right, when you made a mistake, you thought it was for Pesach, and it could have been for Pesach, so therefore we're going to allow that. Now, then comes the back and forth, and this is where I got a little confused. So Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Ma'im Pesach shu mutar lishmo, kisheshinat shmo chayav. Okay, here I kind of had it okay, but then from there we're going to go, I got a little confused. So let's just start. Rabbi Eliezer says, you take a Korban Pesach and you say it's for the wrong reason, right? It was a Korban Pesach, meaning today it could have been sacrificed on Shabbat, and you took it and you said, I'm doing this for a shlamim. You're going to be obligated according to everybody. So if you take a shlamim that couldn't have been sacrificed today, and just because you change its intent and say, oh, I'm doing this as a Pesach, all of a sudden we're going to exempt Rabbi Yoshua, you're going to exempt people, that makes no sense, right? This is a korban that couldn't have been brought today, this animal. And all of a sudden, okay, so that's his claim. Amarli Rabbi Yoshua lo. He says, no. Im amarta b'Pesach, sheshinau b'davar asur. Tomar b'zvachim, sheshinam b'davar hamutar. What do you mean? Why is the Pesach a problem? Because you took it and you called it now a shlamim, which you can't bring a shlamim. But the other thing, which was a shlamim, it's true, you couldn't have brought it as a shlamim, but you're planning to bring it as a Pesach right now. So, and that was your mistake. So you thought to do something that was permitted. That's why it's allowed. Okay, so each one, again, it's a bit of a dizzying logic, but each one brings a logic. So Amalei Rabbi Eliezer. Here comes Rabbi Eliezer's claim. Imurei tzibur yochichu. Okay, and this is where I didn't explain it correctly. He says, Korban Tamid will prove that you're wrong. Why? He just said a minute ago, if you take a shlamim and you do it l'shem Pesach, it's going to be okay. That's what Rabbi Yeshua says. Because you were trying to do something that we're allowed to sacrifice on that day. But let's do the same with a Korban Tamid. Korban Tamid you could bring on Shabbat. But shehem mutarin lishman, v'ashochet lishman chayav. We all agree, okay, and Rabbi Yeshua, you agree with me about this, that here you have a case that if I took a Tamid and I slaughtered it as a Tamid, everything's great. I can do that on Shabbat. But if I took it if it was a shlamim, and I said I'm using this for my Korban Tamid, you agree with me that you'll be obligated. Chayav, you'll have to bring a Korban because you can't do that. You'll have to bring a Korban Chatat, a sin offering for what you did for desecrating Shabbat. And since you agree with me on that, let's take the comparison to Pesach. So therefore, if you do one like that on Pesach, you take a shlamim and you sacrifice it as a Pesach, which is allowed to do today a Pesach. So then, right, you should be obligated just like in the Korban Tamid. To which Rabbi Yeshua says, Lo, there's a huge difference between Korban Tamid and Pesachim. What is that? Korban Tamid, there's only one. You bring one a day, that's it. Or two a day, right? But there's one in the morning, one in the afternoon. But Tomar Pesach, She'en Lo Kitzba. So once you've already brought the Korban Pesach, the Korban Tamid, and then you make a mistake and bring a Shlamim as a Korban Tamid, you know there's only one. So you should have known you made a mistake. That's why I think, right? That's why I agree with you there that you would be obligated. But in Korban Pesach, just because you brought one Pesach, right? People bring all day long, they're bringing Pesachim all afternoon. So there's no limit. Okay, and we're going to question this in the Gemara. Is that really true? That anywhere where Ein Lo Kitzba, Rabbi Yeshua is going to obligate you? We're going to see it's not necessarily the case. Okay, and that if Yesh Lo Kitzba, you're going to be obligated. If there's a limit to how many you can do, then he thinks that I would agree that you're obligated. To which Rabbi Meir says, until now, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua both agreed that these Korban Tamid, you're going to be obligated if you make a mistake, right? You take a shlamim and try to sacrifice as your Korban Tamid, everyone agrees. Rabbi Meir comes and says, by the way, I disagree with the premise of your statement because I think that even a Korban Tamid, you were trying to do a Korban Tamid, you're going to be exempt. Okay, so today's daf we're going to spend trying to understand these lines. Okay, they're quite complicated and we're going to question them and try to figure out exactly what's going on. So we're going to skip now to the top of Ayin Bet. B'mai askina. We're now going back to line number 1. Pesach sheshachato shelo lishma b'Shabbat. You take a Pesach, you sacrifice it in the name of a shlamim on Shabbat, the 14th. You're chayav. Everyone agrees you're chayav. So what's the case? There's two ways you could do something lo lishma. You could do it intentionally. You knew it was a Pesach and you're sacrificing it as a shlamim. Or you didn't know it was a Pesach and you're sacrificing it as a shlamim. So ilema bitoeh, you were mistaken, if you want to say that's the case. Now, what did we say? Why are you obligated? Because everyone agrees that this is a disqualified sacrifice because you've removed it from being a Pesach. You've called it a shlamim and you're not allowed to do that. So if it's bitoeh, that you did it by mistake, shmat mina, you can infer from here, akira b'ta'ut havya akira, that you can uproot a korban by mistake. Okay, when we talked about lishma, lo lishma, it wasn't clear whether we were talking about is it mistake or not mistake. He says there's a whole machloket in Moraim. If you uproot a korban by accident, is that really called uprooting? When we say lishma, is it you did it intentionally or maybe even unintentionally? So there's a whole debate about this by Amoraim. Now, if there's a whole Amoraitic debate about this, then it wouldn't be something that's clear from a Mishnah, meaning that it can't be talking about a mistake, because if it was a mistake, it would be totally clear from this Mishnah that you can uproot this sacrifice by mistake. And that's not something that's very clear to anybody, which means it can't be that that's what the Mishnah is talking about. So therefore, the Mishnah must be talking about be'okir. The Mishnah must be saying you on purpose did it. Okay, now this is strange because we thought, wasn't our whole topic of the Mishnah ta'abed var mitzvah? And that's what they're going to say. They're going to say, wait, now the first case, we didn't really, it's not like we said the first case. The first case maybe could be because there's no debate here. Nobody thinks you're exempt, right? Exempt comes in to play when there's a mistake. So according to the Gemara now, they say, if you want to explain, because you can't explain it's a mistake. So right now we're assuming it's on purpose. Okay. So now, right. It's a good question. Isn't a chatat only brought for shogeg? But again, you're shogeg about Shabbat. You brought it as a korban shlamim. That you on purpose did. But you didn't remember that it was Shabbat and you can't bring a korban shlamim on Shabbat. You were shogeg about Shabbat. But you were intentional about switching your korban from a Pesach to a shlamim. So now, so if that's the case, that it's okir, that it's intentional, Ema Seifa, look at the continuation of the Mishnah though. The continuation is clearly talking about a case of a mistake. You can't say otherwise. Because what does it say? The next line is Shar kol hazvachim, or any other sacrifice. Sheshachatam l'shuma Pesach, right? It all depends. Imenam ru'uyim chayav, im ru'uyim hem Rabbi Eliezer chayav chatav, Rabbi Yeshua poter. Now why? Right? Iba okir, if you did it intentionally, mali ru'uyim, mali she'en ru'uyim. What's the difference? If it could have been brought or couldn't have been brought as a Pesach, what's the difference if it was a calf or not? It just doesn't make a difference. The whole point was, right? The point of it being, if it was a lamb, let's say, right? Then we understand you made a mistake. That was the whole logic. It's clearly talking about a mistake here. So, elapshita bitoeh. Clearly, the second line is talking about someone who makes a mistake. So now they say, so you're going to say, Reisha ba'oker sefa bitoeh. We've seen this many times. You're going to say what? one case of the Mishnah is one thing, and the next case is something else. That seems very odd, right? Isn't the topic of the whole Mishnah ta'abed var mitzvah? Made a mistake. So Amar Rabbi Avin in Reisha Boker v'Sefer b'Toeh. So they basically say, no, I have no problem with that. We can say the first line is intentional. The second line is you made a mistake. And it's talking about two different cases entirely. Now, Eshkachei Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef Rabbi Abau. This is a bit strange why they're telling us this, but maybe to just hammer in the point that really this is how we read this Mishnah, in case you thought it was a strange way to read it. So Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef finds Rabbi Abba to have a kai b'uchlusa de'inashe. He was sitting in a horde of people. Okay, I was thinking of the funeral yesterday with these hordes of people that came out, right? And, so they're in the middle of these hordes of people. Why they're telling us this, I'm not sure, although it reminds me, we've seen stories where rabbis end up meeting each other in the shuk and then they start having these halachic conversations. I think they're trying to say that, every time these rabbis meet up with each other, they start talking Torah. And he says to him, he says, who's this Mishnah? What's the case of the Mishnah? What is it talking about? And Amarle, he said to me, Reishabo, Ker v'Sefer b'Toeh. Yeah, in fact, this is the way it is. The first line is a guy who does it intentionally. The Pesach to the Lo Lishma is intentional. When you take the Zvachim, you do it L'Shem Pesach, that was by accident. I learned it from him 40 times. And then finally I had it like it's in my pocket. In other words, I went over it and over and over it until I really got it into my head. So that's our assumption. But now we're going to start questioning this. Look at our Mishnah though. Go to the continuation of the Mishnah, and the continuation of the Mishnah is going to make no sense according to this. Amar Rabbi Eliezer. So remember Rabbi Eliezer's first claim. What does he say to Rabbi Yeshua? In Pesach shemutar lishmo. If you take a Pesach and you're allowed to do it l'shem Pesach, right? Today it's mutar, but kishashina et shmo chayav, and then you change it to say it's a shlamim, you're going to be obligated. Zvachim shehem asurin lishma. When you take a zeva, which is forbidden to bring today, a shlamim, let's say. Kishashina et shmo, all of a sudden, because you call it Pesach, all of a sudden, Eino din she'eh chayav, you're going to say it's patur. Of course it should be obligated. Just because you change its name, that all of a sudden is going to take some animal that you weren't allowed to sacrifice today and all of a sudden make it permitted. So now, why is this going to create a problem? Because in ita halodami, tereisha ba'oker v'sefer b'toeh. If really the first case is okel, then what are they saying? If you're going to, let me just say it very simply without even getting into details. The first case, you're obligated. The second case, Rabbi Yeshua exempts. So he says, if you're obligated in the first case, obviously you're going to be obligated in the second case because, right, there you change, right there, you were allowed to do the Pesach, and here you weren't even allowed to bring this animal, and yet you did it, right? So all the more so you'd be obligated. But if the first case is intentional and the second case is accidental, then this logic wouldn't make sense. Just because you're obligated in an intentional case doesn't mean you'll be obligated in an accidental case. So his whole logic falls flat based on that. So how do they explain this? Instead of saying, no, maybe you're right, the whole Mishnah is to'et, they don't say that. They keep with this answer. Rabbi Eliezer lo shanele. Rabbi Eliezer doesn't think that there's any distinction between to'et, one who made a mistake, and one who did it intentionally. He thinks no matter what, you're going to be obligated. So therefore, he compares intentional and mistake because he thinks that these are all one and the same. Because even when you make a mistake, since you weren't allowed to do it today, you're not allowed, right? You're going to have to bring a korban chatat, a sin offering. So therefore, and in any case, it makes sense because a sin offering is brought, right, accidental. So here, he doesn't care whether it's accidental or intentional. So that makes sense. However, if he doesn't think there's a difference, but Rabbi Yeshua obviously thinks there's a difference, then what would you expect Rabbi Yeshua's retort to be? You would expect him to say, I differentiate between oker and to'et, and that would have been a perfect answer. But that's not what he says. So they say, therefore, the Rabbi Yeshua deshanele l'shanele hachi. Instead of bringing his answer that he brought, he should have brought this as an answer and say, the first case is intentional, this case is accidental. That's why I'm going to exempt here. So they say, well, let's read Rabbi Yeshua's answer. Hachi ka'amrele. This is really what he said to him. He says to him, lididi, according to me, I don't distinguish, lo dames. I don't think they're the same. So therefore, reisha ba'oker v'sefer b'to'et. In other words, we're adding words now to the Mishnah. Rabbi Yeshua really did answer Rabbi Eliezer like that. He said, listen, according to me, I think that you're comparing apples and oranges. That's intentional. This is unintentional. That's why I'm going to exempt. But lididach, but according to you, who doesn't think that there's any distinction, lo, I disagree with you even on your terms, okay? Because of a different reason. אם אמרת בפסח ששינה את שמו לדבר האסור, תאמר בזבחים ששינה את שמם לדבר המותר. Right? You can't compare because there, you took, what happened, right? You took this Pesach, again, this is just regurgitating the words of the Mishnah, what we explained there. You took a Pesach and you changed it to something that you're not allowed to bring today at all. You turned it into a shlamim. But when you take an animal that was supposed to be for a shlamim, even though you couldn't have brought it today anyway, but now you call it a Pesach, it's because you're trying to do something that you're allowed to do today. You're trying to do the Korban Pesach. And that's why you changed it, L'davar Mutar, and that changes it entirely. And that's why you're going to be exempt. Okay, so that was just to try to figure out. So far, everything we did today so far was to explain that the Reisha is Oker and the next line is To'eh. And that even though the Mishnah we thought was talking about someone who makes a mistake in the Dvar Mitzvah, in the end, it really starts off with one case of intentional change, and they're going to be obligated, and then we get into unintentional. Amalei Rabbi Eliezer. So now we get to the next line of the Mishnah. We want to analyze this one. Imulei tzibor yochichu. Remember, the Korban Tamid will prove. Shehem mutarim lishman, vas shochet lishman chayav. Right, they're permitted if they're done lishma for the right reason, for the Korban, right, for the Korban Tamid, and because you can bring it on Shabbat. But if you're shochet lishman chayav, but if you take them and you take a different sacrifice and you slaughter it l'shem tamid, you're going to be obligated. Amar lo Rabbi Yeshua lo im amarti b'morei tzibor sheken yesh lehem kitzba tomar b'Pesach she'en lo kitzba. You can't compare the two because Pesach has no bounds and the tamid has only one. So now we're going to question that assumption, as I told you when we learned it in the Mishnah. Anytime something's limited in how many you can do, Rabbi Yeshua is going to obligate you. Let's show you a case where there's a limitation and Rabbi Yeshua also exempts you. I don't know if you remember this, you probably will because it's kind of a funny case. You have two babies in front of you, right? Whether it's a case of twins, that one was born ben hashmashot, or we can just simply say this, let's say a man who has two wives and they both have babies one day apart. One is obligated to do the Brit Milah on Shabbat, and one is obligated, his Brit Milah is, which case we know, right after Shabbat. V'shachach umal et shalachal Shabbat b'Shabbat. Now he accidentally does the Brit Milah to the wrong one. Okay, so he does the one that's not even, he's on his seventh day, this baby, he's not even chayav yet in Brit Milah, and he does the Brit Milah on Shabbat. Chayav. Okay, in that case, you're going to be obligated. Echad lemulo be'erev Shabbat. Right, everyone agrees you're obligated because you haven't done a mitzvah, right? You've circumcised someone who's not obligated in circumcision. But if you have a chad lemulo be'erev Shabbat, echad lemulo be'Shabbat, okay, if you have one whose Brit Milah was Friday and you didn't do the Brit Milah on Friday, and you have another one whose Brit Milah is on Shabbat. Now the rules are, it only overrides Shabbat if you're obligated, if that's your eighth day. And this isn't the baby's eighth day. His eighth day was yesterday, is now on day number 9. In that case, Rabbi Eliezer mechayev chatat, Rabbi Yeshua poter. Okay, Rabbi Eliezer obligates you and Rabbi Shimon exempts you. Now, here's a classic case. Yesh lo kitzba. There's only one you're supposed to do. And here, now, it's not clear exactly what happened. Either you did only one or maybe you did both. It's not so clear, but it's similar to the Korban Tamid. Now, it might depend on the order of events, whether you already did the Brit Milah, whether you already did the Korban Tamid, and that's what the Gemara is going to eventually say. But right now, it sounds like we're talking about the same thing. So, Amar Rabbi Ami, Hacha b'ma'askinan, kigon shekidem umalat shel erev Shabbat b'Shabbat. De'ika hach Shabbat de'tari beh. It's exactly, they say exactly what I suggested before, which is that when it comes to the Korban Tamid, the case, it's two different cases, two different situations. With the Korban Tamid, you already sacrificed the Korban Tamid, and now you take a shlamim and sacrifice the Korban Tamid. That's a big mistake. Even Rabbi Yeshua will agree, because yesh lo kitzba, there's only one you're supposed to bring, and you already brought it. So that's your mistake. But in this case, you didn't yet circumcise any of them, and you're about to do your mitzvah, and because you're busy with your mitzvah of being mal, circumcising the one who's supposed to be circumcised today, you made a mistake and you circumcised the wrong one. That's what Rabbi Yeshua will exempt you. So we basically say they're two different cases. Now, what's the issue though? What did we say? If the Imulei Tzibor case is a case, and I kind of said it, but it's not so clear what the case is. Is it before you did the Korban Tamid or after you already did today's Korban Tamid? So right now we're assuming it must be you already did the Korban Tamid, and that's why it's clear, even according to Rabbi Yeshua, that you're going to be obligated. But what's the problem? Remember Rabbi Meir disagreed with them and said, even in a Korban Tamid, you're exempt. Now, why would he exempt you if you already sacrificed the Korban Tamid? That's a ridiculous mistake to make. Of course you should be liable. So here we're going to question that and say, Rabbi Meir Omer, Afa shochet l'shem umurei tzibor patur. Afa gav de kadim v'shachtinu l'umurei tzibor bereisha, right? Even though you sacrificed it already, he's still going to exempt you? V'hatanya, but wait, doesn't it say in a Braita, Rabbi Chia, V'hatanya Rabbi Chia me'avel arev, he brought the following Braita. He's from Avel Arev, that's what most people say. So Rabbi Chia came from that city. He told us the following Braita. And this is going to be a parallel case when it comes to Brit Milah. Amar Rabbi Meir, lo nichleku Rabbi Eliezer v'Rabbi Yeshua. They don't, okay, Rabbi Meir is coming to define their argument. They don't disagree in which case. Al shayu lo shnei tinokot, echad lamul erev Shabbat, ve'echad lamul b'Shabbat, v'shachach umalat shel erev Shabbat b'Shabbat dechayav. They both agree that if it's the case of the Friday and the Shabbat baby, that you do the Brit Milah on the Friday baby, that you're going to be liable. Now, why? You have to assume, it doesn't say this, but the assumption of this line is you have to assume that it's a case where you already circumcised the Shabbat baby. And if that's the case, then you have no mitzvah in front of you to do today. So because there's no mitzvah, that's why everyone agrees you're going to be liable. And that's going to be a problem because according to this, if there's no mitzvah before you, just like what's the comparison? In the Korban Tamid, there's no mitzvah in front of you to bring a Korban Tamid because you already did it. Then according to Rabbi Meir, even Rabbi Yeshua is going to agree that you're liable. And what did Rabbi Meir say? No, you're not liable in this case. You're exempt. So something's not going to work here with our explanation that the Tamid case is you already did the Korban Tamid. Okay, and there's no mitzvah in front of you. Because it doesn't make any sense that the Rabbi Meir would exempt. And even if you think maybe he would exempt, it's very clear from here, he doesn't exempt in that case. He says they all agree that you're liable in a case where there's no mitzvah ahead of you because you already did the mitzvah. Okay, that's the comparison. Both are cases where you already did the mitzvah one, and now you're trying to do another one claiming, oh, I thought I needed to do it. Then everyone's going to assume you're liable, even Rabbi Meir. This is just the end part of what he says, which isn't really relevant anymore, but amanich leku. What is their debate between them according to Rabbi Meir in this Braita? If you had two babies, one on Shabbat and one after Shabbat. So now in this case, what do you have? You have two in front of you. You're supposed to do a mitzvah today. You're supposed to do the one from Shabbat, but you accidentally choose the wrong one. That's your classic, where Rabbi Yeshua thinks, Tabid Var Mitzvah, you're going to be exempt. You made a mistake. While trying, you were busy trying to do a mitzvah and you made a mistake. Okay, so now that's our assumption. But again, we're talking about first you did the Korban Tamid, first you did the Brit Milah beforehand, and now you don't even have a mitzvah in front of you, and that's why you'll be chayav. But now they say, okay, and that was a question on this assumption that when we tried to distinguish between the Brit Milah case and where did we start? Rabbi Yehoshua in our Mishnah said, as long as there's kitzbah, it's limited, then we're going to obligate you, like the Korban Tamid, right? Because we have to explain why Rabbi Yeshua is mechayev in the Korban Tamid. We compared it to the Brit Milah. We said, oh, it's not the same, right? The comparison is not the same case of Brit Milah because the Brit Milah, he hadn't yet done the mitzvah. And the Korban Tamid, he had done the mitzvah. But once we say that, Rabbi Meir makes no sense because how could Rabbi Meir possibly exempt when he himself says that if you already did the mitzvah, you're not exempt. So that's where we're stuck. So now they say, you obviously misinterpreted this Braita that we brought as a question. Okay, so we're answering a question with a question. Okay, we're saying, how could you possibly understand the Braita in the way you just explained it? V'tizbara, mahatam delo avid mitzvah patar Rabbi Yeshua, hecha dika avid mitzvah machayev. You said that Rabbi Meir said that the machloket is only, the machloket is when you have the baby, the Motzei Shabbat baby that you did on Shabbat, but if it was Friday, you'd actually be liable. So he says that comes with something, you end up saying something absurd. When you take that Friday baby and you do a Brit Milah on Shabbat, so that baby was obligated in Brit Milah, and you did a Brit Milah, so you actually did a mitzvah. So all the more so you should be exempt because you actually did a mitzvah. Whereas in the case of taking this Motzei Shabbat baby, Saturday night baby, right, or Sunday baby, and he's only on day number 7 now, you didn't even do a mitzvah when you circumcised. It's not a mitzvah if you circumcise before it's time. And you're going to say you're not liable, right? That's ridiculous. So therefore, you must have misunderstood this source. So I'm going to read the source in a different way. Amri Debei Rabbi Yanai. It says from the house of Rabbi Yanai, Reisha kigon shekadam umal shel Shabbat be'erev Shabbat. Okay, so now, right, maybe I said this the wrong way. The first way they understood it, was that you did the Shabbat baby on the same day as the Friday, but now they're saying that you actually did the Shabbat baby yesterday. In other words, you knew you had one on Friday and one on Shabbat, and you totally mixed up. Okay, and you didn't find out till later that you had mixed this all up. So on Friday, you did a Brit Milah, but you did it on the Shabbat baby. And on Shabbat now, you did the Friday. Now, why is that different? If you're standing on Shabbat and you have two, and let's say you did the Shabbat one first, but you still were involved in a mitzvah when you did the circumcision, and Shabbat was nidcha, as we say. But here, what happened? If you did the Shabbat baby yesterday, then now you're standing on Shabbat, and what do you have in front of you? A baby who's not obligated in circumcision today. So shelo nitna Shabbat lidachot. There was no reason at all to override Shabbat. Like there's this concept, and we talked about this before. One Shabbat could be overridden, so already we're going to be looser about things. If Shabbat could have been overridden for circumcision that day because you had 2 babies to do, then we'll be more lenient. But in this case, it must be the reason why we're more strict on Friday, the Friday baby, even though you actually did a mitzvah, is because there was no reason at all to override Shabbat. But when you have that Motzei Shabbat baby, Seifa, the second case, Nitna Shabbat lidachot etzlo. You have 2 babies, one today, one tomorrow, and you just made a mistake as you were trying to do a mitzvah that Shabbat, it overrides Shabbat. So Shabbat was overridden and you just did the wrong one. That's why we're going to be more lenient. But this has nothing to do with, then it has nothing to do with the order of which they were done or anything else. It could be out of order. It could be, you already did the Shabbat one, and now you do the Motzei Shabbat one. The point is, Shabbat was overridden, and that's the issue. And that's why Rabbi Meir is lenient when it comes to the Korban Tamid, because his whole theory has nothing to do with anything we were discussing before. His theory is that once Shabbat was overridden for this Korban, then even if I tried to sacrifice something else in the name of that Korban, even if I already did the Korban Tamid, it doesn't make a difference. Shabbat was already overridden for Korban Tamid, so I now take this animal that was a shlamim and I sacrifice it for Korban Tamid. I'm exempt because Shabbat was already overridden for the topic Korbanot Tamid, okay? Just like for Brit Milah. Whereas that Friday case, no Shabbat was overridden at all. There was no potential to override Shabbat because there was no baby in front of me that was supposed to be circumcised today on Shabbat. So therefore, that question goes out the window. So Amalei Rav Ashi Rav Kahana. But wait, a side question now. Hachanami, Harei Nitna Shabbat lidachot etzel tinokot alma. What do you mean? There's babies born every day. Somewhere in the world, there's a baby whose circumcision is today. So the concept that Shabbat is not nitan lidachot etzel brit milah, somewhere in the world, Shabbat is overridden today for circumcision. So why don't we apply that to me? The obvious answer is Amalei l'gabei dahai gavra miat lo ikyai. Yes, it's very nice that somewhere around the world there's someone who needs to be circumcised today, even though it's Shabbat and Shabbat is overridden for him, but it's not overridden for me. So that's not a question. Okay, moving on in the Mishnah now. So that was all, again, the first section was to say, Reisha ba'oker, Seifa b'to'eh, right? That we shift gears in the beginning of the Mishnah from one type of case to another. The second thing was all to question this idea about Yesh lo kitzba. Does Rabbi Yeshua really think every time Yesh lo kitzba, you're going to be obligated, like in the Korban Tamid? What about the case of the Brit Milah? To which we answer, the case of the Brit Milah was a case where first, right, you hadn't yet done your mitzvah. And the case of the Korban was you had already done your Korban. To which we question, then how do you explain Rabbi Meir? To which we finally explained, Rabbi Meir has a whole different approach, has nothing to do with this, and he doesn't care about the order. He thinks as long as the concept of Shabbat could be overridden, that's fine. Okay, so that was where we got to. It was very long-winded to get there, but that was in a nutshell what we just did. Now we get to the next line in the Mishnah. ושאר כל הזבחים ששחטם לשום פסח, אם אינם ראויים חייב, ואם ראויים, רבי אליעזר מחייב חטאת, רבי יהושע פוטר. Right, so now you take a different korban that you slaughtered mishum Pesach. It all depends if it was an animal that could have been used. Now, instead of bringing an example of a calf versus a lamb, I'm going to give a different example. Let's say it wasn't of age, okay? Let's say it was too old to be a korban Pesach versus, right, remember, korban Pesach has to be within its first year. So first, the Gemara asks, Man tana d'shana lebein ru'uyin l'shein ru'uyin. I told you this before, that not everybody agrees by this distinction. So who's the Tana of our Mishnah? Rabbi Shimon. Our Mishnah goes by Rabbi Shimon. The Tanya. It says in a Braita, Echad is v'chim ru'uyin, ve'echad zv'chim she'enan ru'uyin, v'chen ha'shochet l'shem imurei tzibor, patur divrei Rabbi Meir. That's what we have Rabbi Meir about the imurei tzibor. So here you see, I mean, it was also in our Mishnah, but here in this Braita it says, whether they're ra'oi, whether they're not ra'oi, here comes Rabbi Meir's very open-minded approach, right? Very inclusive. Any kind of mistake you make and you accidentally slaughtered the wrong sacrifice on Shabbat because you were overall involved in a mitzvah, as long as there was some mitzvah upon you to do that day that overrides Shabbat, we're going to say you're exempt. And he just doesn't distinguish even if you take a calf and sacrifice it as a korban pesach. Amar Rabbi Shimon, lo nechleku Rabbi Eliezer v'Rabbi Yeshua al she'enan ru'uyin shechayav. They all agree that if it wasn't appropriate to bring that animal as a korban pesach, of course you're going to be obligated. That was a silly mistake you made. Alma nechleku, what's their debate? Ala ru'uyin. They only debate if the animal could have been used. Rabbi Eliezer mechayev chataf, Rabbi Yeshua poter. Again, then we get to the machloket. Who says you're exempt? Who says you're not? Amar Rabbi Amar Rabbi Elazar. Poter haya. Now he jumps one step farther. Now we might have thought this already, and that's why I tried to say let's just assume maybe they're talking about the age difference, which is less obvious. So Amar Rabbi Elazar, he says Poter haya Rabbi Meir afilu egel shel zevchei shlamim sheshachato l'shum pesach. Rabbi Meir even exempts, even if it were such a blatantly obvious distinction, even a calf. Amar le Rabbi Zera le Rabbi v'hamar Rabbi Yochanan modeh haya Rabbi Meir b'balei mumim. What do you mean? Here's a case where it's totally obvious, a Baal Mum, and even there, Rabbi Meir will say you're obligated. If you took a Baal Mum, so now we're going to compare. If you took a calf and sacrificed as a Pesach, isn't that the same as taking a blemished animal that can't be used for a sacrifice and using it for the Korban Pesach? So if Rabbi Meir obligates there, then he should obligate also in the first case. He should make you liable. So Amarle, b'Baalei Mumim lo tarid behu, hai tarid be. When it comes to Baalei Mumim, you're not ever focused on getting worked up about the korban and I'm doing a mitzvah with this because you know that these can never be brought on the altar. Whereas if you're busy dealing with this calf and you're trying to sacrifice something on the altar for some korban, we can see how you could get confused, right? And think it for a korban pesach, and therefore, right, you can maybe forget that, oh, a calf can't be used for a korban pesach, and therefore Rabbi Meir will exempt you. But when it comes to a Baal Mum, which you can never bring on the altar, no one's ever involved with sacrificing them at all, that they would get confused, and therefore we're going to make you liable. So now we're going to question this. What would he say if you took an animal that wasn't sanctified at all? You can only take an animal for a Korban Pesach that was designated to be a Korban Pesach. Let's say you didn't designate the animal at all. It's chulin. It was never sanctified. And you used it. What would he say? He would still exempt you. Now, right? So isn't that the same? In other words, if it's chulin and it was never designated to be a sacrifice, then you can't say I was busy involved with the sacrifice nature of it because it wasn't sanctified at all. So you could say it's the same thing as a Baal Mum. You weren't busy thinking about the korban aspect of it because you can't bring that as a korban. Also, this one can't be brought as a korban until it's sanctified. So they say, no, there's a difference. Baalei Mumim michalfe. Lo mechalfe, hane mechalfe. Again, think about the difference. A Baal Mum is very noticeable. But if you have an animal that wasn't sanctified, it's not like he looks different once you sanctify him. He looks exactly the same. So therefore, one could confuse that with an animal that could be brought as a sacrifice. And that's why it's more likely you could make a mistake with it and we're going to exempt you. Whereas a Baal Mum, everyone knows it's very obvious it can't be used as a sacrifice. So now they say, wait a minute. So then you're saying, are you going to confuse it with animal that could be sacrificed, or you're not going to confuse it? But didn't Rav Bebi bar Harmar, Rav Bebi bar Abai Amar Rabbi Elazar, Poter haya Rabbi Meir afilu egel shel zevchei shlamim sheshachato l'shum pesach. Tamad Rabbi Meir mishum ditarid. In other words, there we said the issue was that you're focused on a mitzvah. Is it focused on a mitzvah, which wouldn't apply to the chulin, or are you going to confuse it, which then would put the chulin in the other side? So you're saying two different things. Which one is it? So the obvious answer is Amar le tarid afal gavdilo mechalif, mechalif afal gavdilo tarid. As long as you have one of them. If it might get switched, even though, right, it looks the same as a regular animal, even though it's not sanctified, and you're not focusing on the mitzvah that makes you confused about it because it wasn't designated for a mitzvah, that's still, we're going to exempt you. Or tarid, right, if you're focused on it for a mitzvah, even though it's not, right, like the korban that was the wrong one. But la fuke, right, the one that's the egel, you were focused on for a korban, even though lo michlafe, you wouldn't really confuse the two because it's the wrong animal. But la fuke bale mumin de lo ichafu michlaf lo mitrad tarid. The only one that gets exempt is one that has neither of these. Number one, you're not going to confuse it because it's blemished. And number two, you're not focused on sacrificing it because it doesn't get sacrificed, that you could say, oh, I got confused and forgot while I was doing the mitzvah. Okay, so that's how we answer that question. We basically say both are issues. Yativ Rabbi Zera, Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchak, a kila to Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchak. Okay, so they're sitting, I forgot what the kila is. It's, I don't know if someone can remind me, but they were sitting by Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchak, the Yatve v'Kamre, and they were sitting and saying on the porch, thank you. They were sitting on the porch, and they started saying the following. We're going to see possible machloket Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, or possible Rabbi Yochanan's just adding to Rish Lakish. Amar Rish Lakish, nitchaleflo. We're now back to Abed Bar Mitzvah. We're getting off into all sorts of interesting cases. Okay, in Daf Mishalahem this week, they go off on a bunch of these different cases. Nitchaleflo shipud shel notar b'shipud shel tzaliv achalo chayav. If you take a shipud of meat, right, you have a skewer with meat that was left over and you're not allowed to eat it, and it gets confused with a shipud of meat, sacrificial meat that you can eat, and you ate the one that was notar. So you're chayav. Okay, why? Because you can't say I was to'ebed var mitzvah. Okay, you ate the wrong thing. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, ishto nida ba'al chayav. Let's say a man sleeps with his wife while she's in nida by accident. He doesn't know. So he's obligated. Yivim to, because he did something, right, accidental. That's unwitting. You're liable. Yivim to nida ba'al patur. But what if she's your yivama? Okay, this is a man whose brother dies without children. His wife is supposed to marry the brother so that they can, let's say, mekim shem hamet, right, to keep his name going. So he's supposed to he's supposed to marry her and have children with her. So if he sleeps with her, has relations with her while she's in nida, he's exempt. So we're gonna have to figure out why this is, and we're also gonna have to figure out, does he disagree with Rish Lakish when he adds ishto nida? Does he say, I don't think your case is obligated, but my case is, or does he say, in addition to your case being liable, I think mine also is? So ikadamri, there's two ways to read it. Kol shekain ba'hi d'mechayev d'lo asa mitzvah, right? Yours for sure you're liable because he didn't even do a mitzvah. Even in mine, where you could claim maybe having relations with your wife is a mitzvah, I'm also going to obligate you. Ita amre ba'i patur. Some people say no. He thinks in the shiput case you're exempt. My timer hatam hu dehavale. This is a fascinating thing. Dehavale l'shiyule, with the wife who is in nida. It's your fault. You didn't ask your wife, are you in nida? You should have just asked her. Okay, I'm not going to get into where's the woman and why didn't she just speak up and say something. Okay, let's leave that aside. But when it comes to the shipud, you can't ask the shipud, are you notar, are you not? The shipud's not going to answer you. So when you have an option to ask and you didn't, then we're going to make you liable. But Rabbi Yochanan's going to say, I don't agree with you in the notar case. So there's two ways of saying, did he disagree or not? But now the question is not going to be that. The question is going to become, why did Rabbi Yochanan distinguish between the nida and the yivama? This also becomes very interesting. So, ma'ishna yivim to dekavid mitzvah. The assumption is you're being makayim the mitzvah of hamikim shem hamet, right? You're trying to do your brother's, right? It's not a mitzvah ba'ba avera, Shoshana, because mitzvah ba'ba avera is when you're doing a sin on purpose. Here it's all unintentional. You didn't know the woman was in nida, right? It's first of all, it's fascinating to think about in their day, right? If communication between husband and wife was not so great, right? It's complicated. Like, how would he know if his wife was in nida or not? Now, you expect her to say so, but maybe the wife is timid and doesn't want to say and is embarrassed, right? So you think about it. So how much do we blame you for this? So, right, maybe you should have just asked and then maybe you would have made her comfortable enough to say so. But maybe, right, it's fascinating to think about the what's going on in her mind behind all this. In any case, what's the difference? Theoretically, they're both the same. With a yivama, you have a mitzvah, lakim shem hamet, to keep your brother's name going. So that's to have relations with her, to have children. Well, ishtonami kav mitzvah. What about reproducing, having children? That's also a mitzvah. So they say ishtomu bere. She was pregnant. So then they say, right now she's in nida, but sometimes a woman could be in nida when she's pregnant. Va'ika simchat ona. But even if she's pregnant, there's a mitzvah. Okay, this is a whole, I mean, again, this stuff has lots of interesting things. We're not going to get into them, but there's a mitzvah to make your wife happy by providing her with sexual relations. So they say, shelo b'shat onata. Well, there's a certain amount of times, okay, this comes up in the Gemara elsewhere, where how many times a week you're supposed to, or how many times a month, you're supposed to have relations. So you've already done that, okay? It's in addition. Rava, and this is a great line, chayav adam l'sameach ishto b'dvar mitzvah. But according to Rava, it's whenever she's interested, you're supposed to. Okay, this is a fascinating thing, and it affects all sorts of interesting halachot about one is supposed to make one's wife happy. So they say samuch levista. Well, that's all true, as long as it's not near the time where she's expecting to get her period. So maybe this was near the time she was expecting, which makes sense, because in the end she was in nida, and therefore there was no mitzvah. Okay, and that's why he's going to be liable. So they say afilu hachi yivim tonami. Well, then the same thing should be true for the Yavama, right? We're assuming it's the same kind of case. Maybe she was also samuch levista. So they say, okay, so what's the difference? Yivim to bazis mina. There's a great line. Ishto lo bazis mina. Here, all of a sudden, the man is embarrassed. The wife, he should feel comfortable enough to ask her. But the Yivama, this is like a new relationship for him, and it's a bit awkward, the whole thing. And he's a little shy to start asking her, do you have your period or not? So therefore, we basically exempt him there, but we don't exempt him with his wife, because there's an expectation that he should have asked her. So now they say, Rabbi Yochanan Kiman, according to who does he go in this opinion? Ilema ke Rabbi Yossi ditnan, Rabbi Yossi omer, Yom Tov Harishon shel Chag shechal להיות b'Shabbat, v'shachach להוציא על לולב לרשות הרבים, פטור מפני שהוציא ברשות. Why did he exempt the Yivama, basically? So is it because a person who walks out on the first day of Sukkot forgets that you're not supposed to take a lulav on the first day of Sukkot on Shabbat? Look, he did it bereshut. He thought he was doing something right. It turned out it was wrong. Is that why? So they say, no, you can't say the same thing there, because dilmashanehatam dizmano bahul. There it's limited. That's the big mitzvah is on the first day. So it's a limited in time mitzvah. And that's why he was so worked up about it and made a mistake. That's what we're going to exempt him. But you wouldn't say the same for the Yivama. If you don't sleep with her tonight, you can sleep with her another night. There's no such thing as you have to do it right now. Rabbi Yeshua dizbachim. Maybe it's Rabbi Yeshua of our Mishnah. Dilma hatamnami is mano bahul. No, it's the same thing though. You're trying to do the korban pesach. You took the wrong sacrifice, but you had the right intention. But that's also mano bahul. It's the same thing. You have to do the pesach today, so you were worked up about it. The elik Rabbi Yeshua de tinokot. What about the case of the tinokot? Hatamnami is mano bahul. It's the same thing. All of these are time related. So then they say maybe elik Rabbi Yeshua de truma de tanan. Hayauchel betruma. Here's an interesting case. You're eating truma, and all of a sudden, nodashu ben grusha ben chalitza. You find out that your mother was a divorcee or a chalutza. Okay, I'm not going to get into all the right. That's the husband, the brother didn't want to do yibum and he did chalitza. So those people can't marry a Kohen. So you find out you're not a Kohen really. You're a halal. Rabbi Eliezer Machayev Keren b'chomesh. You basically are like a zar who has to pay up if you did it accidentally. Rabbi Yeshua poter. Again, Rabbi Yeshua exempts you. So there you'd say there's no issue of zmano bahul. Dilma kera baby barabai, da'amra baby barabai, but shuma be'erev Pesach dizmane bahu. He explains that source is talking about on erev Pesach when zmano bahu, you want to get rid of your chametz. Maybe that's why. Inami, or you could say shane truma deikre avoda v'avoda rachmana echshar. Maybe truma is called avoda, and avoda the Torah permitted. It's not. How do we know this? Because it says hayal medu makriv. Now they bring a parallel case to when you're in the temple and you're sacrificing, and all of a sudden, no dashu ben grusha ben chalitza. Kola korbanot kulan shekriv gabeim mizbech psulin v'Rabbi Yehuda makshir. Okay, everything you did, what happens? Is it all disqualified? Or Rabbi Yeshua says, no, it's all okay because you were, again, to'eh b'dvar mitzvah when it came to avoda. Okay, so we're going to say you can't learn it from here because this is exceptional for avoda. My time at Rabbi Yeshua. So they get it from that verse. Utruma, heche yikre avoda. Now we want to say just like that's avoda, and because of that it's permitted. Likewise, we're going to permit it specifically by truma, but then that won't apply to the yibum case. So how do we know truma is called avoda? And this connects with something we talked about the other day. Detanya, ma'aseh Rabbi Tarfon shelo ba'emish lebeit midrash. Rabbi Tarfon didn't show up in the Beit Midrash. The shacharit mitzao Rabban Gamliel. Rabban Gamliel finds him in the morning. Amar lo mipnei ma lo ba'at emish lebeit midrash. Right? You get stuck. Why were you cutting class? Amar lo avoda avadati. I was busy with avoda. Chamarlo. What kind of an excuse is that, right? What kind of excuse? My dog ate my food, right? What do you, my homework, right? There's no such thing as avoda nowadays. We don't live in the times of the temple. Amarlo, what was I busy doing? I was eating truma. It says in the pasuk, I didn't quote this verse by name the other day, but here it says it. Avodat matana atenet kunatchem v'azar karev yumat. It calls it avodat matana. Eating the truma is avoda. Okay, and any zar who tries to eat it, right, is going to get killed. And that's why. So in the end, we don't really have an answer. Who does Rabbi Yochanan hold by? Because all the cases we brought were all either they were time specific, and that's why maybe he exempted there, or this case because it was avoda, and maybe that's why he was exempt. But it doesn't really answer our question as to where Rabbi Yochanan gets it about this Yavama case. We'll end with that for today. Long, complicated daf. I hope it was clear enough. Have a great day, everyone.